lines about Babylon and Sodom and hellfire and great white thrones. But in the summertime, Old Man Upjohn didn't do anything. Just sat on the stoop talking politics and religion and all like that. And while it was fine to preach, that didn't put victuals into anybody's belly. Corrie May was glad her brothers worked for their living and left heaven and hell to Pa. She looked around for Budge, but he wasn't in sight yet. At the land office, the men had to line up and wait their turns to pay the rent, and sometimes a fellow had to stand there an hour or more. The sun was getting hot. Corrie May thought of the park overlooking the river where ladies took the air on pleasant afternoons. It would be cool in there. Crossing the wharf, she went through the gateway of the park and walked over to the little lake. She sat down on the grass in the shade of a magnolia tree, watching the swans gliding about the water. It was drowsily quiet here, and the noises of the river sounded as though they came from a long way off. Except for children playing under the trees with their mammies, the park was nearly empty. Not many of the great folk seemed to be about. But of course not. This was July, and they would be up north escaping the summer. But even as she remembered this, she heard the soft thud of horses' hoofs and saw a carriage come into the park, and a young lady and gentleman get out. Corrie May recognized them. Mr. Dennis Larne, who owned Ardeith Plantation, the richest and loveliest place in Louisiana, folks said, and Miss Anne Sheramy, whose father was the owner of Silverwood, the plantation that joined Ardeith at its north edge. Mr. Dennis Larne was tall and slender and looked very fine in a black suit with long trousers buckled by a strap under his instep. He was bowing over Miss Sheramy's hand with deferential grace. Miss Sheramy looked pretty as a fashion plate in a great hooped dress of muslin and a pink bonnet with a plume. As they stood there by the Ardeith carriage, they made such a picture of elegance that Corrie May smiled with admiration. Mr. Larne went out of the park toward an office building on the wharf, and with a word to the coachman, Miss Sheramy came toward the lake. Corrie May was seized with bashfulness and wondered if she should not move on. But apparently without noticing her, Anne Sheramy spread her ruffled skirts on the grass and sat down, idly watching the swans. Corrie May nearly gasped at the sight of anybody's being so careless of such expensive clothes. But Anne Sheramy seemed to think nothing of them. She pulled off her gloves, and calling to one of the Negro marchands who walked about with trays of delectables for children, she bought 2 molasses cakes. Leaning forward on her knees in a fashion that was almost certain to get grass stains on her skirt, she began tossing scraps to the swans. Then, as she became aware of Corrie May's wide eyes on her, Anne impulsively held out one of her cakes. "Do you want this?" she called. Corrie May could feel her face lighting with astonished gratitude. She moved nearer. "Why, yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." She began to eat the cake, but stopped uncertainly, holding it with a crescent-shaped bite taken out. "Oh," she said. "Did you mean it was for the birds, ma'am?" Anne glanced up again, her hand full of crumbs. "Why, no. You may eat it yourself," she returned, smiling. Corrie May had seen her often on the street, shopping or riding horseback, but she had never before been so close to her, and she was trying to decide now if Miss Anne were just naturally lovely, or if it were her clothes that made her seem so. No. She was very pretty indeed, with light brown curls escaping from her bonnet, and large dark eyes, and a complexion that had been protected from even a tinge of sunburn. When she smiled, a dimple appeared surprisingly under her right eye. "These molasses cakes sure is good," Corrie May said to her appreciatively. "Are they really? I've never eaten one." Anne tentatively bit into the remnant of her own. "Why, they are," she agreed in surprise, and turning around, she raised her voice. "Marchand, apporte-nous un quart de gâteau." Corrie May regarded her with increasing admiration as